From the newsrooms of the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, this is Please Explain. I'm Samantha Selinger-Morris. It's Thursday, August 17. Caroline Kennedy has an intimate connection to Australia and the Pacific Islands. Her father, American President John F. Kennedy, was rescued by an Australian coast watcher in the Solomon Islands when his patrol boat was sunk in World War II. When JFK was assassinated in 1963, his ambition to be the first sitting American president to visit Australia died with him. But for the last year, his daughter, Caroline Kennedy, has served as the American ambassador to Australia. She's here during a particularly critical time for the alliance between the United States and Australia, which is arguably more important for our safety than at any time since World War II. Today, Foreign Affairs and National Security correspondent Matthew Knott on the diplomatic tightrope Caroline Kennedy has to walk in order to strengthen the connection between the US and Australia, and whether the American government might soon be in a position to set Julian Assange free. So, Matt, when most of us think of Caroline Kennedy, we think of the glamour and tragedy associated with her family name. So what can you tell us about the sort of diplomacy that she's practiced since moving to Canberra just over a year ago?
Yeah, so Caroline Kennedy came to Australia with a lot of expectation, a lot of fanfare because of her name.
We may not all know the face, but we know the surname. Caroline Kennedy, the daughter of JFK, doing a spot of shopping at Sydney Airport before beginning her new day job.
Morning, everyone.
Diplomatic post.
Her family, the family dynasty she comes from, she's the only surviving child of John F. Kennedy, one of America's most beloved presidents. So when it first was reported quite a while back at the start of the Biden administration that she was in line for this job, there was a lot of excitement. We've never had an ambassador here with such star power.
You mean you didn't all come out here for the last person?
We didn't. She arrived in Australia last July. I went to the airport when she just stepped off the plane for a brief press conference, and it was only about 5 minutes long, but it was a noteworthy event because she gently but forcefully chided a veteran male TV reporter for what she saw as interrupting a young female reporter.
It's been 549 days.
Did you just talk over the woman?
I did.
Okay, well, she started.
Please identify yourself by your name and address. Ambassador, I'm Isabel.
So that showed straight away, that she came with a presence and she had a particular way of doing things. In the intervening year, she hasn't done much media in the sense of doing long-form interviews or giving speeches or giving press conferences. She's more been practicing what you'd call soft diplomacy, travelling around the country, every state and territory. And so last week, my colleague Peter Hutch and I went to the US Embassy in Canberra, and we had about a 45-minute interview.
We're just going to talk to the dog.
Yeah, right.
Aren't we? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's good. I know, that's what I do. So.
We did want to start though with that question about whose idea was Australia and why?
Well, I really wanted to come back to this.
And she made the point, in our first question, we were saying, whose idea was it for you to come here? Did Joe Biden ask you to come, or was it your request? And she said, no, I really wanted to come here.
I really wanted to come back to this region, and of course, Australia is the best posting that, and so originally I was told you can't have Australia, everyone wants to go to Australia. But it all worked out. So, but I felt like
she previously served as ambassador to Japan under the Obama administration. She wanted to come back to the Asia Pacific region, but to do something different. She suggested Australia, and she was told by advisors that's really many people's number one pick. Would you think about somewhere else? But she was quite persistent, she said, and she was given this role.
And is that why you wanted this region? Because it is so central to...
That's why I wanted... Australia is the central country and the most important region. That's why I wanted to come here.
Okay.
So to that point, that Caroline Kennedy told you that Australia is the central country in the most important region. So did this surprise you, especially given that so many of us think of Australia as peripheral on the world stage?
Yeah, I guess from one perspective, you could say, of course, she's going to say that Australia is important. It's her job to create a good perception here and to tell us that we're wonderful. But absolutely not. I think that it's true. And I think that Australians do need to keep getting our head around the fact that we do matter. We particularly matter right now. In Washington, in America, we are seen as a pivotal country in this part of the world. You know, that there's so much focus on what China is doing, how China is trying to become more powerful, and we're absolutely crucial for that. The question is, who is going to control essentially the Indo-Pacific region? Who is going to be the most powerful? How is the balance of power going to be determined between China and America? So much talk of late about a potential invasion of Taiwan that would completely shift that calculus and could really change it. You know, there's so many important trends happening right now in China around their economy, around their demography. So this is, many experts in this field, you know, say this is the key point that we're going to see whether, for example, China's economy will ever overtake America's. There's a huge battle in the Pacific for a huge contest between the two powers for dominance. So that helps explain why she wanted to come to somewhere like Australia at this time.
Okay, so we're important. I get that. But how did Caroline Kennedy respond to criticisms that have been made about this strategic alliance that both of our countries have, specifically that this could actually lead Australia to being a bigger target of China's missiles?
Yeah, so this is a fascinating aspect of where I think the debate is going to keep going around the US-Australia alliance. There has been, in the past few years, without too many people noticing until now, obviously AUKUS was a huge deal, but even far beyond that, this intensification of the alliance in terms of all the activities that Australia and America are doing together and the basing of US forces, US weapons in Australia, you know, essentially the idea of whether Australia is becoming a big US military base in the Indo-Pacific is an idea we seriously need to confront. And this is something that Sam Roggeveen, who is an international security expert at the Lowy Institute, has been raising. He's been saying that, you know, by working so much more closely together, by putting all these American troops and weapons here, we're making ourselves potentially a target for a Chinese nuclear attack in the case that a conflict flares up. And is this really the direction that we want to be going? So we did ask Caroline Kennedy about this.
And potential involvement in a nuclear catastrophe. What's the response to that concern, to that argument?
Well, first of all, Australia is investing in its own defense.
And she said that essentially, yes, the US and Australia are working closer together, but this is a sovereign decision for Australia.
So that's all really Australia's decision, and I'm sure that, you know, the US and Australia discuss, train together, work together, you know, share lessons learned, have served together. But those are all really complex decisions that Australia is going to make about what's best for Australia.
You know, Australia is deciding to beef up its defences. Australia is acknowledging that it needs to do more to acquire the type of weaponry, the type of capabilities that it needs, and that the two countries are working together to preserve peace and stability. So that's how she frames it.
So, Matt, another crucial issue to Australia that Caroline Kennedy has waded into is, of course, the fate of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. We know that Prime Minister Anthony Albanese was vocal earlier this year about his desire that Assange's ordeal come to a conclusion, and he alluded to Assange even possibly having some sort of plea deal. So what did Caroline Kennedy tell you about this?
Yeah, I was very keen to ask her about this because earlier this year, was a big deal, actually, when Caroline Kennedy hosted members from across the political spectrum who are pro-Assange MPs in the Australian Parliament at the embassy. And they came out of that meeting that was, a private meeting, but they came out very optimistic about the hope that something good was going to happen for Julian Assange.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Police have confirmed reports that WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange has been arrested at the Ecuadorian embassy in London.
This case has been going on for so long, in many ways, over a decade, but the American charges were 4 years ago.
Assange is accused of helping former U.S. intelligence analyst Chelsea Manning crack into a Defense Department computer, giving her access to hundreds of thousands of confidential documents.
And his extradition process is really now starting to reach its end stages. It's becoming very real about whether he will have to go to America. And it was interesting timing as well, because just a few weeks ago we had the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken in Australia, and I asked him at a press conference about America's view of the Assange case. Anthony Albanese has said repeatedly that he wants this to be brought to a close. It's gone on too long. And Blinken was very explicit about saying, we've heard your concerns. We also need Australians to understand Americans' concerns, that the charges that Assange is facing is very serious, he said. Assange is facing 17 counts of breaching the Espionage Act. The maximum sentence for those charges altogether would be about 175 years, so it's a lot.
And thanks for your patience. I just want to say free Assange. Thank you.
Julian Assange!
So I was keen to ask Caroline Kennedy about this, and while using slightly careful language, it's clear what she was talking about. She said she didn't consider this a diplomatic issue, which was interesting. What I take that to mean is that, look, the Biden administration is not just going to drop these charges. Biden has said he respects the independence of the Justice Department. The hope is fading that that's going to happen. But she said, but I believe there is a way to resolve this. And she said again in another way, she said there is a resolution here. And so where I think this is all heading is towards a potential plea bargain, in which Assange, similar to what David Hicks did a few decades ago, so that Assange would have to accept some guilt for the charges that he's been accused of. Presumably the sentence would be reduced. It's perhaps, the 4 years that he's already served, that might be most of it. He could come back to Australia and be free quite soon, is the hope on his team's side. That would be something that the Justice Department would have to agree to. Now, Assange's brother, Gabriel Shipton, he told me that, they see hope in what she has said here, because he was saying Caroline Kennedy wouldn't be saying these things if they didn't want to find a way out. The Americans want this off their plate. And I think this is going to come to a head in coming months. Assange's appeal process is running out. Also, Anthony Albanese is going to the White House for a state dinner at the end of October. This might be something the Americans also want to have done, because otherwise there'll be a lot of questions about whether Albanese raised this in his meetings with Biden. So, there are some hopeful signs there that some deal could be stitched up, but also a lot of it also depends on Assange and how much he is willing to give up in the process.
And obviously, Matt, when we think about US politics at the moment and the relationship between Australia and the States, it'd be remiss of us not to talk about Donald Trump. He's just been indicted for a fourth time. He's currently the frontrunner to be the Republican presidential nominee. And presumably, Trump would actually present a deep risk to allies like Australia, because he hasn't shown much evidence, I guess, that he believes in political alliances as Joe Biden does. So what did Caroline Kennedy have to say about that?
Now, this is, of course, the big question that's hovering over the US-Australia alliance, is the very real possibility that by 2025, Donald Trump will be president again. And how does that affect all these decisions that are being made right now around AUKUS, around Defence Corporation, if we're going to have 4 more years of such an unpredictable, volatile character as Donald Trump back in the White House? Now, Caroline Kennedy, while she's very much a Democrat, she's very much a fan of Joe Biden, she was trying to reassure that the relationship, the alliance extends beyond particular leaders. She said that, foreign policy historically in America and even right now, it enjoys real bipartisan support. She's confident that Australia will be able to count on America into the future, including on that submarine deal. Look, we've been through 4 years of Trump once already. Australia, out of many countries, did pretty well. We avoided some of the worst of it. We got exemptions from certain steel tariffs, for example. We were able to keep sending asylum seekers from Manus Island and Nauru there. So many countries were envious of the way Australia was treated. The question is, what would a second Donald Trump presidency be like? There's no reason to think he dislikes Australia particularly, but the feeling is that he'd be much more empowered a second time around, much more unpredictable. There would be much fewer traditional orthodox experts, in the administration like there were first time around. They were the so-called adults in the room. This time around, they'll be Trump loyalists. So it's obviously a worry. The Biden administration has been, for us, very predictable, a very good administration for Australia, particularly Albanese, to work with. Trump would be living in much more uncertainty.
Thank you, Matt, for joining us.
Absolute pleasure.
Today's episode of Please Explain was produced by Hannah Mills-Turbot, with technical assistance by Chi Wong. Our executive producer is Ruby Schwartz. Please Explain is a production of The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. If you enjoy the show and want more of our journalism, subscribe to our newspapers today. It's the best way to support what we do. Search The Age or smh.com.au/subscribe. I'm Samantha Selinger Morris. This is Please Explain. Thanks for listening.